The latest out of Maui is, well, pretty horrific. I believe the death count is now up to about 115, but 1,000 people are still missing. 2 weeks after the fire, 1,000 people are missing. That's not good news. The president finally went there after hanging out at the beach and given a no comment when people would ask him if he had anything to say to comfort the people who were left behind in Maui. But just having a photo op doesn't do much, obviously. A lot of questions are being asked about the government's response there, the lack of sirens, the lack of diverting water from streams to the reservoirs so there could be water to put out the fires. We need to figure it all out. But if you're a Democrat, if you're a left-wing activist, if you're a climate activist, you've already figured this out. You figured it out the second you saw that there was a fire. Obviously, this is because of climate change. Or is it global warming? I always forget what they're going with. Let's ask Daniel Turner. He's the executive director of Power of the Future. And Daniel, it is so sad that the second this story hit, all the usual suspects came out without knowing anything, saying this was obviously because of global warming, because of carbon emissions from your big bad oil companies over at Power of the Future.
Yeah, it's very frustrating that climate change has become this shield for government incompetence. And I don't know what caused the fires yet. I don't think anyone has definitively said, though there are lots of news reports coming out about known arsonists back in May, about sparking and problems with the electrical wires for the last couple of years. But all of that aside, we don't know what caused it. And we are mourning the loss of scores of human lives, fellow Americans. But to use climate change as the shield for government not doing its job is really frustrating, because government has a role in our society, and the amount of incompetence we see is extraordinary.
Well, and isn't it also true, it appears from initial reports, that because of the very same climate activists and environmental activists that say you can't own an SUV, they also say you can't clear brush and tear down trees and have some controlled burns in areas that are overgrown. And that actually contributes to the fuels in fires like these.
Absolutely. And there are reports of that coming out in Maui, how there were areas that they weren't allowed to clear, especially around power lines. But we see this all the time in California, right? When you look at the terrible California wildfires, somehow only centralize in California. You never see it in Western Nevada. You never see it in Southern Oregon, Southwest Idaho. It's only California. And what does Gavin Newsom do, the governor? He says, well, it's climate change. And now, like Pontius Pilate, he gets to wash his hands of the boring part of government, which is forest management. No one wants to be governor to manage forests. You want to be governor to talk about equity and abortion and guns and sexy issues, right? So the boring part of being the governor, which are things like grid maintenance and forest maintenance, they all get pushed aside, and then we just use climate change as the shield.
Yeah, and last I checked, I mean, it's not like Hawaii is this bastion of overdevelopment and you know, I mean, it's pretty pristine already. Environmentalists already have their way in Hawaii. So are we to believe that these fires and the high winds that accompanied them, that this was a one-off, that 100 years ago we didn't have high winds until people started driving gas guzzlers? That makes no logical sense.
It doesn't. And if you look at the reports of just the weather, the humidity, the dry, it was all fairly normal. Hawaii was having a fairly normal month of August. So there are no climate anomalies that you could pinpoint to. And that's why climate change becomes this ethereal and universal cover for everything. But again, it is very frustrating that government has a role in our society. It has jobs it has to do. It has infrastructure projects it has to be responsible for. And we seem to have government pivot from these to issues that get folks elected.
And of course, we conservatives, we don't like politicizing natural disasters like this and these horrible things. So we're sitting here, I want to mourn the, God forbid, possibly 1,000 people who have died from these fires. So we try to be respectful, and meanwhile, they have no shame. They jump right in there and they say, we got to have new laws against your SUVs, because they love politicizing these things.
And never let a climate climate crisis go to waste, or any crisis. But yeah, there's a lot of pressure on this president to declare an official climate emergency. And we have to be petrified of that. Just look at the COVID emergency. And when you declare a COVID emergency, you can tell people they can't go to church. You can tell people they can't leave their house. You can leave some stores open because they have big DC lobbyists, but you can close down mom and pop shops because they don't have DC lobbyists. And if the COVID emergencies were terrible, and they were, and we're barely coming out of them, what will the climate emergencies be if Biden is able to declare a climate emergency, especially when it comes to 2024 election and ballot box proceedings? Let's see what the protocols are in a climate emergency next November.
Yeah, and Daniel, people outside of DC might be rolling their eyes thinking, oh, nobody's going to do that. This is a very real thing that's being discussed in Democrat and in media circles, although that's redundant, where there is pressure on Joe Biden to call a climate emergency. Not only will that theoretically empower him, unless he's challenged, and I hope he will be challenged quite a bit in the courts, it'll empower him to enact emergency measures very similar to what we saw during the COVID-19, except instead of Anthony Fauci, it'll be John Kerry calling the shots.
Exactly. And we'll see a whole series of protocols and can and cannot do's coming and stemming from this, all under the guise of it's for your own good, it's for the public health. And like we saw with COVID, the powerful ones will be exempted. Heck, Joe Biden went to Tahoe for the weekend. Why? Because he can. He doesn't care about his carbon footprint. He's never worried about not using Air Force One. So get ready for the climate emergencies, because they will be draconian and ruthless, especially as we get closer to the presidential election.
It's also, by the way, you're right, this is all about the presidential election. It's a cynical political ploy, because when Republicans object, when members of the House majority actually try to block that move and challenge the president, they've got their talking point. They've got their issue. Look, the Republicans are science deniers, and they're denying that there's climate change and global warming. Even for those Republicans who think there may be an issue there, that doesn't mean you hand over control to the executive branch of government.
No, and it's the same playbook that they'll use for climate as they did use for COVID. They'll deplatform folks who say the wrong things about. Heck, there are certain platforms I can't say exactly what I believe about climate or energy, because I will be flagged as misinformation or disinformation. So the room for debate is absolutely gone. And then shows like yours will be targeted for spreading climate misinformation, and nothing is more threatening than that. It was so advantageous to the powerful, to those who desire power, what they did during COVID, that they'll never give up that power. They'll use climate next. They'll use any crisis to just glom onto power, take away your property, take away your freedom, and have absolute control.
Real fast, we only have a minute left, but I mean, at Power of the Future, Daniel, you actually are in contact, I'm guessing, with some of the executives at these oil and gas companies. There was a time there where they tried to play nice with these radicals, when they tried to sort of think that they could appease them. Have they figured it out now? Have they figured out whose side is on what now?
Gosh, I hope so. They could donate to Power of the Future rather than donate to these green groups. You can't get in bed with your enemy, and we talk a lot in this city in DC about coming together and reaching across the aisle, and that's all fine and dandy. But when your enemy wants to put you out of business, when your enemy wants to destroy you, there is no common ground. And the radical left wants to end the fossil fuel economy. They want it for themselves. They just don't want it for regular Americans. It's rich men north of Richmond personified in the energy space. And so, yeah, I hope these energy companies stop working with the eco-left, because the eco-left is not their friend and never will be their friend.
Well played, Daniel Turner. So to sum this up, hey, Exxon, donate to Power of the Future, not to Greenpeace. I think we got it. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Larry.
And God forbid the Sierra Club. There's more to come on O'Connor tonight. Keep it here at Salem News Channel.